I sold everything. My house, my truck, even my tools. I thought I was buying a fresh start. Instead, I ended up on a sidewalk in Iloilo, with nothing but a suitcase that wasn't even mine. 66 years old, and I'd lost everything to a woman whose smile felt like salvation, but whose secrets destroyed me. This is how I went from dreaming of mango trees to sleeping on concrete, and why I'll never trust my heart again. The pension checks weren't cutting it in Ohio. $200 for groceries that used to cost $80, rent climbing every year while my income stayed frozen. After Martha left me and the kids stopped calling, I sat in that empty house thinking about coconut palms and warm beaches I'd seen in travel videos. The Philippines looked like paradise. My neighbor Jim had moved to Cebu and sent photos of himself grinning next to a 20-something Filipina. "Best decision I ever made," he texted. "Your money goes 10 times further here." I researched for months. Iloilo City seemed perfect, smaller than Manila, safer, with decent hospitals and English speakers. The YouTube videos showed retirees living like kings on Social Security. I sold the house, liquidated my $400 neck, and bought a one-way ticket. 3 suitcases, $48,000 in savings, and a heart full of hope. I was done being lonely in America. I was ready to find love in the islands. The hotel lobby felt like stepping into another world. Marble floors, tropical flowers, and air conditioning that actually worked. After 30 hours of travel, I just wanted a shower and sleep. That's when I saw her behind the reception desk. Clarissa. Long black hair pulled back professionally, warm brown eyes, and a smile that made my exhaustion disappear. "Welcome to Iloilo, sir," she said, her English careful but clear. "First time in the Philippines?" "Yes, and hopefully not the last," I replied, trying not to stare. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "You chose the right city. Iloilo has the best food, the kindest people. You will love it here." Her fingers brushed mine when she handed me the key card. "If you need anything, please ask for Clarissa." I spent 3 days in that hotel, extending my stay just to talk with her during her shifts. She recommended restaurants, warned me about taxi scams, and told me about hidden beaches only locals knew. When I mentioned looking for an apartment, she said, "I can help you. I know good places, clean and safe." On my 4th day, she met me after work. We walked through downtown, past jeepneys decorated like carnival rides and street vendors, selling everything from fried fish to cell phone cases. The heat was oppressive, but her presence made it bearable. "You seem different from other foreigners," she said as we stopped at a seafood restaurant. "More respectful, more gentle." "I've made too many mistakes with women back home," I admitted. "I'm looking for something real this time." Her eyes softened. "Me too. I work very hard, save money, take care of my family, but sometimes I am lonely." We talked for hours. She'd grown up poor in a small town outside Iloilo, worked her way through college, and sent money to her parents every month. She was 32, never married, focused on building a stable life. When she smiled at me across that table, surrounded by the chatter of Filipino families and the smell of garlic rice, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Within a week, we were inseparable. She showed me the real Iloilo, beyond the tourist spots. We rode jeepneys to remote beaches, ate lunch at family-owned restaurants where she translated the menu, and walked through markets where vendors greeted her by name. I felt like I was seeing the Philippines through her eyes, and it was beautiful. "You make me feel safe," she said one evening as we watched the sunset from a pier. "American men here, they usually want young girls, party girls. But you are different. You are serious." I took her hand. "I came here looking for peace. I found you instead." She leaned against my shoulder. "Maybe this is God's plan. Maybe we were meant to meet." I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. After a month of hotel living, Clarissa suggested I find a permanent place. "There is a nice house in my neighborhood," she said. 2 bedrooms, garden, very quiet. The owner wants a foreign tenant, someone reliable. We looked at it together. It was perfect, exactly what I'd dreamed of. Tile floors, ceiling fans, a small yard with mango trees. The rent was reasonable, but there was a catch. In the Philippines, foreigners cannot own property, Clarissa explained as we sat in the garden. But if you trust someone, you can put it in their name for protection. My stomach tightened. "That seems risky. Only if you don't trust the person," she said, squeezing my hand. "Harold, I care about you. I want us to build something together. This could be our home." The way she said, "our home," made my heart race. I was tired of being alone, tired of being careful, tired of protecting money that couldn't buy me happiness. I signed the lease in her name and paid the first 6 months up front. We moved in together the next week. She quit her hotel job to focus on making our home beautiful. I covered the bills while she handled the domestic side, cooking Filipino dishes that made my mouth water and creating a warmth I'd never experienced. For the first time since my divorce, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But paradise has a way of showing its thorns. The late-night phone calls started in month 2. Clarissa would slip out to the garden, speaking rapid Hiligaynon in hushed tones. When I asked about it, she'd say, "Just family problems. My brother needs help with his business." Then came the disappearances. She'd leave early in the morning, saying she was visiting her parents, and return after midnight looking exhausted. Her explanations were always vague. Traffic was terrible. My mother was sick. We had to help a neighbor. I wanted to trust her, but something felt wrong. The woman who used to hang on my every word was becoming distant, distracted. When we made love, she seemed to be somewhere else entirely. "Is everything okay between us?" I asked one night after she'd been particularly quiet. She forced a smile. "Of course, honey. I am just stressed about family. You know how Filipino families are, very close, many responsibilities." I didn't know, but I accepted it. Love meant being patient, didn't it? Love meant supporting someone through difficult times. The renovation request started small. A new refrigerator because the old one was unreliable. Fresh paint for the living room. A security system because break-ins were increasing. Each time, Clarissa would present it as an investment in our future. "This is our home, Harold," she'd say, running her fingers through my hair. "We should make it perfect." I transferred money from my Ohio bank account, watching my savings shrink. But seeing her excitement when the new appliances arrived, hearing her talk about our future, made it feel worthwhile. I was building something real for the first time in years. The bigger requests came later. The roof needed repairs before the rainy season. The septic system required replacement. Each emergency seemed urgent, and each one required immediate payment to local contractors who only accepted cash. "In the Philippines, everything is cash," Clarissa explained when I suggested using credit cards. "Contractors don't trust banks, but they give discounts for cash payment." I liquidated more investments, transferring increasingly large sums to her account. My rational mind screamed warnings, but my heart overruled it every time. This was love. This was partnership. This was what I'd come to the Philippines to find. By month 6, I'd spent $30,000 on the house. My savings account that had started at $48,000 was down to $15,000. But the house looked amazing, and Clarissa seemed happier than ever. "You are so good to me," she whispered one night after we'd christened the new bedroom set. "No one has ever cared for me like this." I held her close, breathing in her shampoo's coconut scent. "I love you, Clarissa. I want to take care of you." "And I love you too," she replied. But something in her voice felt hollow, like an echo in an empty room. The first major red flag came when I decided to surprise her at the market. She'd said she was shopping for dinner, but when I arrived, she was nowhere to be found. I asked the vendors who knew her, and one old woman gave me a strange look. "Clarissa, she no come here today, she go with her husband to Bacolod." My blood went cold. "Husband?" The woman looked confused, then embarrassed. "Sorry, sir. I think I mistake someone else." But I could see in her eyes she wasn't mistaken. She knew something I didn't. That night, I confronted Clarissa. "A woman at the market mentioned your husband." Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. "That old woman is crazy. She confuses me with someone else. Harold, you know I am not married. Why would you believe gossip?" Her reaction was so intense, so defensive, that I backed down, but the seed of doubt was planted. The tricycle driver was the one who finally told me the truth. Santos had driven me around town for months, and we'd developed a friendship of sorts. One afternoon, as we waited in traffic, he cleared his throat nervously. "Sir Harold, I need to tell you something. About Miss Clarissa." My chest tightened. "What about her?" "She has husband, sir. They separated but not divorced. He lives in Bacolod with gambling debts. She told my cousin she found rich American to help solve problems." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Are you sure?" Santos nodded sadly. I am sorry, sir. I like you. You are a kind man. But you should know the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Clarissa, studying her face in the moonlight, wondering how many lies lived behind those beautiful features. In the morning, I decided to do something I should have done months ago. I hired a private investigator. The report arrived 3 days later. Marriage certificate dated 2019 to Roberto Ramos. 2 children with him, living with her parents. A history of debts, both personal and business related. Most damning of all, recent photographs of her meeting with Roberto at a hotel in Bacolod, taken just days after she'd told me she was visiting her sick mother. My hands shook as I read the details of the life she'd hidden from me. The woman I loved, the woman I'd trusted with my future, didn't exist. She was a character Clarissa played to separate me from my money. When she came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the report spread out in front of me. She froze in the doorway, her market bags falling to the floor. "Harold, what is this?" "I think you know exactly what this is," I said quietly. She moved closer, her eyes scanning the photographs. Her face cycled through shock, fear, and finally resignation. "I can explain everything," she said, sinking into the chair across from me. "Please do. Start with your husband." Tears welled in her eyes. "Roberto and I, we have been separated for 2 years. But in the Philippines, divorce is very difficult, very expensive. We are not together anymore, but legally still married. And the debts? The gambling? He owes money to bad people. They threaten our children. I was trying to help him pay so they would leave us alone. With my money." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Harold, please understand. I do care for you. I do love you. But my children come first. I thought if I could solve Roberto's problems, then we could be together properly. You thought you could lie to me, take my money, and then what? He'd just disappear? I thought I could handle it. I thought I had time to make things right before you found out." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. This woman I'd trusted, this woman I'd rebuilt my life around, had been playing a character from day one. "Everything we had," I whispered. "All of it was a lie." "No," she said desperately. "My feelings for you are real. You are a good man, a kind man. But my situation is complicated. Your situation is that you're married with children, and you conned an old man out of his life savings." She started crying harder. "Please, Harold. I know I made mistakes, but I do love you. We can work through this." But we couldn't, and we both knew it. The trust was shattered beyond repair. The next morning brought a knock at the door. Roberto Ramos stood on my porch, flanked by 2 men who looked like they'd stepped out of an action movie. Roberto was shorter than me but carried himself with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. "Mr. Harold," he said with a cold smile, "I think we need to talk." Clarissa appeared behind me, her face white with terror. "Roberto, what are you doing here?" "Taking care of our business," he replied. "May we come in?" It wasn't really a request. They pushed past me into my living room, my sanctuary, and suddenly I felt like a stranger in my own home. "Clarissa tells me you have been very generous," Roberto said, settling into my favorite chair. "Helping with the house improvements, supporting her family. Very kind of you." "I was helping my girlfriend," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't know she had a husband." Roberto laughed. "In the Philippines, relationships are complicated, but money is simple. You invested in this house, yes? Made it very nice, very comfortable." I looked at Clarissa, who was staring at the floor. "Where is this going?" "The property is in Clarissa's name," Roberto continued. "She is my wife, so technically, this is our family home. You have been living here as our guest." The blood drained from my face. "I paid for everything. The lease, the renovations, the furniture." "You made gifts to my wife," Roberto corrected. "Very generous gifts, but gifts nonetheless." One of his companions handed him a manila envelope. Roberto pulled out a stack of papers and spread them on the coffee table. "These are receipts for gambling debts," he said. "Money I owe to people who don't like waiting. 50,000 pesos. About $1,000 American. "I'm not responsible for your debts," I said. "No, but you are responsible for the complications you've created in my marriage." His voice hardened. "My wife was supposed to be earning money to pay these debts. Instead, she's been playing house with you." Clarissa finally spoke up. "Roberto, please. Harold has already helped so much." "Not enough," Roberto snapped. These men want their money by Friday. If they don't get it, they will take it out of my family. My children. The threat was clear. Pay or face consequences I didn't want to imagine. How much do you want? I asked. The full amount. $1,000. Plus compensation for the time this has cost me. Compensation? Another $1,000. For the inconvenience. $2,000. It would wipe out most of my remaining savings, but what choice did I have? These weren't people you reasoned with or fought in court. Fine, I said quietly. But then, this is over. I want Clarissa and me to work things out without interference. Roberto exchanged glances with his companions and laughed. Mr. Harold, I think you misunderstand the situation. Clarissa is my wife. She lives in my house. You are the interference. The room spun around me. Everything I'd thought was mine, everything I'd built, belonged to them. I was the outsider. I need time to arrange the transfer, I said. You have until tomorrow, Roberto replied, standing up. After that, we solved this problem differently. They left as suddenly as they'd arrived, taking all the air from the room with them. Clarissa and I stood in silence for several minutes. How long? I finally asked. What do you mean? How long have you been planning this? Was any of it real? She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. I never meant for it to go this far. When I met you, I just thought maybe you could help with some money. But then I got to know you. And you were so kind, so lonely. I started to care about you, but not enough to tell me the truth. I was scared. Scared you would leave. Scared Roberto would hurt me. Scared of everything falling apart. So you decided to take me down with you. I packed my things that night, not that I had much left to pack. Most of my belongings had become ours over the past 6 months, and apparently ours meant theirs. The next morning, I transferred the money to Roberto's account and bought a ticket to a cheap hotel across town. Clarissa watched me load my suitcases into a taxi, tears streaming down her face. Harold, please don't go. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix, I said. You're married. You have children. You have debts. And I'm just the foreigner who paid for it all. That's not true. My feelings for you are real. Maybe they are, I admitted. But they're not enough. The taxi pulled away, and I watched my dream house disappear through the rear window. 6 months of my life, $35,000, and a heart I'd thought was too old to break completely. The hotel room was tiny, with a window that faced a concrete wall. The air conditioner wheezed like an old man climbing stairs, and the Wi-Fi barely worked. But it was mine, paid for with money that couldn't be claimed by a secret husband or threatened children. I sat on the thin mattress and tried to process what had happened. How had I been so blind? The signs were all there, but I'd ignored them because I wanted to believe in the fairy tale. A lonely old man finding love in paradise. It was such a beautiful story that I'd refused to see the plot holes. My phone buzzed with a text from Clarissa. I miss you already. Please come home. Home? I almost laughed. I was further from home than I'd ever been in my life. That night, I walked through downtown Iloilo, the same streets where Clarissa and I had strolled hand in hand just days earlier. Everything looked different now. The vendors hawking their wares seemed desperate instead of charming. The jeepneys looked cramped and uncomfortable instead of colorful and exotic. The tropical heat felt oppressive instead of warm. I ended up at the pier where we'd watched our first sunset together, the same spot where she'd told me we were meant to meet. A group of teenagers was hanging out nearby, laughing and playing music from a phone speaker. They looked so young, so carefree. I envied them. My phone rang. Clarissa. Harold, where are you? Does it matter? Of course it matters. I love you. Roberto is gone. He got his money and left. It's just me now. Come home. That house isn't my home. It never was. It can be. I put your name on the lease as co-tenant. You have rights now. I almost believed her. Almost. But I'd learned my lesson about Clarissa's promises. What about your children? She was quiet for a long moment. They live with my parents. They're happy there. We can visit them sometimes. And your husband? Roberto will not bother us anymore. The debts are paid. Until next time. There won't be a next time. But we both knew that was a lie. Roberto would be back whenever he needed money, and Clarissa would be caught between her family obligations and whatever feelings she had for me. I would always be the outsider, the ATM with emotions, the solution to problems I didn't create. I can't do this anymore, I said. Please, Harold, don't give up on us. There is no us, Clarissa. There's you, your family, and your complicated life. And then there's me, the foreigner who was supposed to fix everything with his American money. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed bitterly. Was it fair to lie to me about being married? Was it fair to take my money under false pretenses? Was it fair to let me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist? She was crying now. I do exist. The woman you fell in love with, she's real. She's me. No, she's not. She's a character you played. The real Clarissa is married with children and debts and problems I can't solve. I hung up and turned off my phone. The next few days blurred together. I ate instant noodles in my hotel room and watched Filipino soap operas I couldn't understand. My money was running low, and I needed to make decisions about my future. Go back to Ohio with my tail between my legs? Stay in the Philippines and try to rebuild? Move to another country and start over? All the options seemed equally depressing. On day 3, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a Filipino man in his 50s, wearing a security uniform. Mr. Harold Bennett? Yes. I am Jerry from the barangay. We need to talk about your residence situation. My heart sank. What kind of problem? Someone filed a complaint that you are living illegally in the Philippines, overstaying your visa, working without permit. I'm retired. I live on Social Security. And my visa is current. Jerry looked uncomfortable. May I see your documents? I showed him my passport and visa paperwork. Everything was legitimate and up to date. This is very strange, Jerry said, examining the papers. The complaint says you are living in Banilad district under false pretenses. Banilad. Where the house was, where Clarissa lived. I moved out of that house 3 days ago, I explained. I live here now legally. Jerry nodded slowly. I think someone is trying to cause problems for you. Maybe ex-girlfriend? Maybe. Or maybe Roberto wanted to eliminate any loose ends that might threaten his wife's loyalty. What do I need to do? Come to barangay office tomorrow. Bring documents. We clear this up officially. After Jerry left, I sat in the dark thinking about how thoroughly my life had unraveled. 6 months ago, I was a lonely retiree with savings and dreams. Now I was a broke expat being harassed by local officials at the request of people who'd already taken everything I had. I turned my phone back on and found 17 missed calls from Clarissa and dozens of text messages. Harold, please answer. Roberto came back. He's angry. I told him you left, but he doesn't believe me. He thinks we're still together. I'm scared. Please help me. The last message was from an hour ago. He took my phone. If you get this, stay away. Don't come here. My first instinct was to rush to her aid. 6 months of conditioning don't disappear overnight. But my rational mind knew better. This was exactly the pattern we'd been trapped in. Clarissa in trouble, Harold to the rescue, money changing hands, temporary solution until the next crisis. I was done being the solution to other people's problems. The barangay office was a small concrete building with plastic chairs and a broken air conditioner. Jerry introduced me to Captain Reyes, an older woman who looked like she'd seen every scam and sob story in the book. Mr. Bennett, she said after reviewing my paperwork, your visa is legitimate, but we received serious complaints about your activities. What kind of activities? The complaint says you were involved in illegal property deals using a Filipino woman to circumvent land ownership laws. My stomach dropped. This wasn't harassment. This was potentially criminal. I never bought property, I said quickly. I paid for improvements to a house my girlfriend leased, but I never attempted to own land illegally. Captain Reyes studied me for a long moment. Can you prove this? I showed her my bank records, rental receipts, and contractor invoices. Everything clearly showed payments for renovations and utilities, not property purchases. These look legitimate, she admitted, but the person who filed the complaint says you threatened her family and demanded ownership of their home. That's completely false. The person who made the complaint is Mrs. Clarissa Ramos. She says you became violent when she refused to give you legal ownership of her house. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. After everything we'd been through, after all the money I'd given her, she was throwing me under the bus to protect herself from Roberto. Mrs. Ramos is my ex-girlfriend, I said carefully. We had a relationship, but it ended badly. This sounds like retaliation. Captain Reyes leaned back in her chair. Mr. Bennett, I have been doing this job for 15 years. I see many foreign men come to the Philippines looking for young wives and easy money. Sometimes they become victims. Sometimes they become predators. Which one am I? I think you are a victim. But a victim who made some very stupid choices. She was right, of course. I had made stupid choices. I'd let loneliness and desperation cloud my judgment. I'd trusted someone I barely knew with my financial security. I'd ignored red flags because I wanted to believe in love. What happens now? I dismiss the complaint. Your paperwork is clean, and frankly, Mrs. Ramos's story doesn't make sense. But I suggest you be very careful going forward. I'm planning to leave the Philippines soon. That might be wise. I walked out of the barangay office feeling oddly relieved. The legal threat was gone, but more importantly, I finally understood who Clarissa really was. Not the victim she'd portrayed herself as, not the loving girlfriend she'd pretended to be, but someone willing to destroy an innocent person to protect her own interests. My phone buzzed with another call from her. I let it go to voicemail. Harold, please call me back. Roberto found out about the complaint and he's furious. He thinks I'm trying to get you in trouble to protect myself. He's threatening to hurt me if I don't fix this. Please. I need your help. I know I made mistakes, but I'm scared. Even after everything, part of me wanted to help her. But I'd learned that helping Clarissa meant enabling her cycle of lies and manipulation. The best thing I could do for both of us was walk away. I deleted the voicemail without responding. That night, I sat in my hotel room and made a list of my options. I had about $8,000 left, not enough to rebuild in the Philippines, but enough to get home and start over. My house in Ohio was sold, but I could rent an apartment, maybe get a part-time job to supplement my Social Security, or I could stay and try to make a new life here. Other expats had recovered from worse situations. I could move to a different city, maybe Dumaguete or Cebu, where nobody knew my story. I could be more careful next time, smarter about who I trusted. But did I really want a next time? Was I ready to risk my heart and my remaining money on another possibility of love? Or was it time to accept that some dreams are too dangerous to pursue? My phone rang again. Unknown number. Hello? Is this Harold Bennett? Yes. This is Dr. Pascual from Iloilo Mission Hospital. I'm calling about Clarissa Ramos. She listed you as her emergency contact. My blood went cold. What happened? She was brought in 2 hours ago, with injuries consistent with domestic violence. Broken ribs, facial contusions, possible concussion. Roberto. I closed my eyes and tried to push away the image of Clarissa hurt and alone in a hospital bed. Is she going to be okay? Physically, yes, but she's asking for you. She seems quite distressed. I'm not. We're not together anymore. I see. Should I remove you as her emergency contact? I should have said yes. Should have cut the final tie and walked away clean. But I couldn't shake the image of her lying in that hospital bed, alone and scared. I'll be there in an hour. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear. Clarissa looked small and broken in the white bed, her face swollen and bruised. When she saw me, she started crying. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. Don't talk, just rest. Roberto found out about us. He was so angry. He said I embarrassed him, made him look weak. Did you call the police? She shook her head. I can't. His friends, they would make things worse for my children. The same trap she'd been in all along. Caught between an abusive husband and dangerous creditors, using me as a shield until it backfired. What do you want from me, Clarissa? Nothing, she said. I just wanted to say goodbye properly. To tell you that my feelings were real, even if everything else was a lie. I studied her battered face, looking for the woman I'd fallen in love with. She was still there, underneath the bruises and regret. But so was the woman who'd lied to me for 6 months, who'd filed false charges against me, who'd put her own survival above everything else. I believe your feelings were real, I said finally, but they weren't enough to make you choose me over your family, and I understand that. But I can't keep getting caught in the crossfire. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I do forgive you, but I can't save you. She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. Will you do me one favor? What? Will you leave Iloilo? Roberto thinks you're still a threat. As long as you're here, he'll keep causing problems for both of us. So this was how it ended. Not with love or reconciliation, but with her begging me to disappear for everyone's safety. I was already planning to leave. Thank you. She reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. I hope you find what you're looking for, Harold. You deserve better than what I gave you. So do you. I left the hospital and went straight to a travel agency. The next flight to Manila was in 2 days, with connections to Los Angeles and Cincinnati. It would cost $1,500 I couldn't afford, but staying was becoming increasingly expensive in ways that had nothing to do with money. I spent my last night in Iloilo, walking the streets one final time, past the restaurants where Clarissa and I had shared meals, the markets where she'd taught me to haggle, the pier where we'd watched sunsets and talked about the future. 6 months of memories that felt like a lifetime. At midnight, I sat in my hotel room and composed an email to my daughter in Portland. We hadn't spoken since my divorce, but I needed someone to know what had happened to me. Dear Sarah, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I wanted you to know I'm coming home. I moved to the Philippines to try something new, and it didn't work out. I lost most of my savings and made some terrible mistakes, but I'm okay. I'll be back in Ohio next week. I don't expect anything from you, but if you're willing to talk, I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship. I've learned some hard lessons about trust and family, and I realize how much I took you and your brother for granted. If you don't want to see me, I understand. But I love you, and I'm sorry for all the years I wasn't the father you deserved. Dad. I hit send before I could change my mind. The flight to Manila was delayed 3 hours, but I didn't mind waiting. I had nowhere else to be, and nothing else to do, except sit with my thoughts and try to make sense of what had happened to me. How do you mourn a relationship that was built on lies? How do you grieve for a future that never really existed? The woman I'd loved was real, but she was also someone else's wife, someone else's mother, someone else's problem to solve. I'd come to the Philippines looking for a fairy tale and found a cautionary tale instead, but maybe that was what I needed. Maybe the loneliness and regret that had driven me across the world was exactly what I needed to face and overcome. As the plane lifted off from Manila, I looked down at the islands, disappearing beneath the clouds. Somewhere down there, Clarissa was probably back in the house I'd helped pay for, dealing with Roberto's anger and her children's questions. Somewhere down there, other lonely expats were falling in love with beautiful women who had complicated histories and impossible situations. I hoped they would be smarter than I was. I hoped they would ask better questions and demand honest answers. But I suspected most of them would make the same mistakes, because loneliness makes fools of us all. 36 hours later, I was back in Ohio, standing in the Cincinnati airport with one suitcase and less than $5,000 to my name. The snow was falling, and the cold hit me like a slap after months of tropical heat. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown Filipino number. Harold, this is Clarissa. Roberto is in jail. The police finally arrested him for the gambling debts. I am free now. Will you come back? I stared at the message for a long time, remembering her smile, her laugh, the way she felt in my arms during those early days when everything seemed possible. Part of me, the part that had fallen in love with her, wanted to believe that this time would be different. But I'd learned the most expensive lesson of my life. Love without trust is just beautiful disaster waiting to happen. I deleted the message without responding and turned off international roaming. Whatever was happening in Clarissa's life now, I couldn't be part of the solution anymore. The Greyhound bus to Columbus was half empty, filled with people who looked like they were running from something or toward something they couldn't quite name. I understood that feeling now. The landscape outside the window was gray and barren, nothing like the tropical paradise I'd left behind, but it felt honest in a way the Philippines never had. Winter doesn't lie to you. It tells you exactly what it is: cold, harsh, and temporary. My phone buzzed again, this time with a response to the email I'd sent my daughter. Dad, I'm glad you're safe. Call me when you get settled. We have a lot to catch up on. For the first time in months, I smiled without forcing it. I rented a studio apartment in a complex that catered to seniors, furnished with donations from a local church. It wasn't much, but the lease was in my name, the bills came to my address, and nobody could take it away from me by claiming I was living there illegally. My neighbor was a widow named Helen who'd moved there after her husband died and her kids stopped visiting. She knocked on my door the second day with a casserole and a warning about the landlord's tendency to raise rent without notice. You look like a man with a story, she said, settling into my only chair. Care to share it over dinner? I found myself telling her everything. The loneliness that had driven me overseas, the woman who'd seemed like salvation, the money I'd lost, the lies I'd believed. Helen listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. How much did you lose total? She asked when I finished. About $40,000. Plus my dignity, my trust in people, and 6 months of my life. Could have been worse. How? You could have married her. Then you'd be stuck paying alimony to a woman in another country while her husband lived in your house. I laughed, surprising myself. It was the first time the situation had seemed even remotely funny. What now? Helen asked. I don't know. I'm 66, broke, and starting over. Not exactly the retirement I planned. Life's like that, she said, gathering up our empty plates. Makes plans for you whether you like them or not. Question is, what are you going to do about it? What was I going to do about it? The question haunted me for weeks as I settled into my new life. I had my social security, barely enough to cover rent and food. I could get a part-time job, maybe at a hardware store or grocery chain. I could learn to be content with small pleasures, library books, church potlucks, early bird specials at chain restaurants. Or I could try to rebuild something meaningful from the wreckage. Sarah called on a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks after I'd gotten back. Her voice was cautious but warm, like someone testing the temperature of water before diving in. How are you adjusting to being back? It's different. Colder. Quieter. Do you miss it? The Philippines? I thought about that for a moment. Did I miss the heat and the tropical fruits and the jeepneys? Did I miss feeling like an exotic figure in a foreign land? Did I miss Clarissa? I miss the idea of it, I said finally. I miss who I thought I was becoming there, but I don't miss the reality. Tell me about her, the woman. So I did. I told my daughter about Clarissa's smile, about the house we'd shared, about the dreams we'd built, and the lies that destroyed them. I told her about feeling needed and wanted for the first time in years, and about learning that those feelings can be manufactured as easily as they can be genuine. I'm sorry, Dad. For what? For not being there when Mom left. For not calling more. For letting you get so lonely that you felt like you had to go halfway around the world to find someone who cared about you. The words hit me harder than any of Clarissa's betrayals. My daughter was apologizing for my loneliness, taking responsibility for choices I'd made as an adult. Sarah, your mother and I divorced because we grew apart, not because of anything you did or didn't do. And I went to the Philippines because I wanted an adventure, not because I was running away from you. But were you running away from us? The honest answer was yes, at least partially. After the divorce, after the kids had stopped calling regularly, after I'd realized I was just another elderly man living alone with his regrets, the Philippines had seemed like an escape from all of it. Maybe, I admitted, but I'm not running anymore. Good. Because I'd like to try to have a relationship with you. If you want that. I want that more than anything. We talked for 2 hours that first call, then again the next weekend, and the weekend after that. Slowly, carefully, we began building something we'd never really had. An honest relationship between two adults who happened to be father and daughter. She told me about her job at a nonprofit in Portland, about her boyfriend who was a teacher, about her dreams of starting her own organization someday. I told her about my years at the post office, about the things I'd learned from losing everything, about the different person I was becoming in my small Ohio apartment. You sound different, she said during one of our calls. How so? Less angry. Less bitter about Mom, about getting older, about things not turning out the way you planned. She was right. Something about losing everything had paradoxically freed me from the resentment I'd been carrying for years. When you're starting from zero, every small improvement feels like a victory. I got a job at Home Depot, 20 hours a week helping customers find screws and paint and garden supplies. The pay was minimal, but it got me out of the apartment and around people. My coworkers were mostly retirees like me, men and women who'd had careers and families and were now finding new ways to stay useful. Frank worked in plumbing and had been married to the same woman for 53 years. The secret, he told me during our lunch break, is never stopping talking to each other. Not about important stuff, just everyday stuff. What you had for breakfast, what made you laugh, what worried you. The big conversations take care of themselves if you're having the little ones. It was exactly the opposite of what I'd had with Martha, and nothing like what I'd had with Clarissa. Both relationships had been built on avoiding difficult conversations until they became impossible ones. My phone still received occasional messages from Philippine numbers. Sometimes it was Clarissa, telling me Roberto was truly gone this time or that she'd gotten a job or that she missed me. Sometimes it was numbers I didn't recognize, women who'd gotten my contact information somehow and wanted to chat with a kind American gentleman. I blocked them all. Helen and I became real friends, the kind built on shared meals and honest conversations rather than romantic attraction. She'd been a teacher for 30 years, and she understood the particular kind of loneliness that comes from spending your life taking care of other people only to find yourself alone when you most need caring. The Philippines woman, she said one evening as we shared Chinese takeout in my apartment. You really loved her? I loved who I thought she was. The problem is, that person didn't exist. Oh, she existed. Just not in the way you needed her to. What do you mean? She was probably a loving mother, a dutiful daughter, a woman trying to solve impossible problems with limited resources. Those are real qualities. They just weren't available to you. It was a more generous interpretation than I'd been able to manage, but Helen was probably right. Clarissa hadn't been evil, just trapped in circumstances that made our relationship impossible from the start. Do you think she really cared about me? I think she cared about you as much as she could, while still protecting her family. That's not nothing, Harold. It's just not enough. 6 months after returning from the Philippines, I drove to Sarah's wedding in Portland. She was marrying David, the teacher she'd been dating for 3 years. It was a small ceremony in a botanical garden, with maybe 40 people who all seemed to genuinely like each other. Walking my daughter down the aisle, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride without regret. Here was something beautiful and real that existed partly because of who I was, not despite it. During the reception, Sarah found me sitting alone at a table, watching her dance with her new husband. You okay, Dad? I'm perfect. This is perfect. She sat down next to me. I have something to tell you. My heart sank. Had she found out about the extent of my financial losses? Was she going to offer money I couldn't accept? David and I are thinking about kids in a few years, and I want them to know their grandfather. The words hit me like a physical embrace. After everything I'd lost, everything I'd given up chasing false promises halfway around the world, I was being offered something real and lasting. I'd like that very much. Good. Because you're going to be a much better grandfather than you were a father. You've learned things now that you didn't know then. She was right. The man who'd left for the Philippines 18 months ago wouldn't have been ready to be anyone's grandfather. He'd been too angry, too desperate, too focused on his own needs to put a child's welfare first. What have I learned? That love isn't about finding someone to fix your loneliness. It's about finding someone worth being less lonely for. The wisdom in my daughter's words took my breath away. She'd learned something about love that it had taken me 67 years and a fortune in mistakes to understand. The drive back to Ohio gave me time to think about the future. I had a job, a decent apartment, a growing relationship with my daughter, and enough money to live modestly but comfortably. I had friends like Helen and Frank who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. Most importantly, I had something I'd never possessed before, the ability to be alone without being lonely. My phone buzzed as I crossed into Ohio. Another message from a Philippine number. This time I didn't delete it immediately. Harold, this is Maria. I got your number from Clarissa. She said you are a good man. I am 28, work as a nurse, looking for serious relationship with American. Please message me back. The old Harold would have been tempted. A nurse sounded responsible, professional. 28 was young but not impossibly so. Maybe this time would be different. The new Harold deleted the message and turned off his phone. I pulled into a rest stop and sat in my car, watching families with children run around the playground equipment. A year ago, that scene would have made me feel excluded, bitter about the family life that had slipped away from me. Now it just made me grateful for the second chance I'd been given with Sarah. My phone rang. Sarah, checking to make sure I'd gotten on the road safely. How's the drive? Good. Peaceful. I'm taking my time. No rush to get back to anything? I thought about my small apartment, my part-time job, my simple routine of work and dinner and phone calls with my daughter. A year ago, it would have seemed like a consolation prize, a pale shadow of the adventure I'd been seeking. Now, it felt like exactly where I belonged. No, I said, but I'm looking forward to getting home. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, home wasn't a place I was running from or toward. It was simply where I was, where I belonged, where people knew my real name and cared about my real problems and accepted me for exactly who I was. The sun was setting as I pulled into Columbus, painting the sky the same brilliant orange I'd watched so many times from that pier in Iloilo. But this sunset was mine, witnessed by nobody but me, belonging to nobody but me, and that made it perfect. I'd sold everything to find love in paradise and lost it all to someone else's secrets. But maybe that had been exactly what I needed to happen. Maybe I'd needed to lose everything to learn what was actually worth keeping. My phone buzzed one more time as I parked outside my apartment building. Sarah again, with a photo from the wedding. The two of us dancing together, both of us laughing at something David had said from behind the camera. In the photo, I looked like a man who belonged exactly where he was. Finally, after 67 years and one very expensive education in the dangers of chasing dreams that belonged to someone else, I was home.